The wind howled like a pack of wolves as Clara Hayes pressed her gloved hands against the frost-covered window of the train station, watching the blizzard transform Silver City, New Mexico, into a white wasteland that erased every landmark she had memorized from the platform. She had arrived 3 hours ago, expecting her uncle to meet her, but the storm had swept in with such ferocity that no one in their right mind would venture out. And now the station master was extinguishing lamps and pulling on his heavy coat with the grim determination of a man abandoning ship. "Miss, I have got to lock up and get home before this gets worse," he said, his weathered face creased with concern. "You cannot stay here. The stove will go cold and they will not find you until spring thaw if you freeze." Clara turned from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was 22 years old, had traveled alone from Boston to start a new life teaching school in this frontier town. And now she faced the very real possibility of dying in an empty train station while a blizzard raged outside. Her trunk sat beside the bench where she had been waiting, containing everything she owned in the world, and the irony of surviving the long journey west only to perish within sight of her destination was not lost on her. "Where can I go?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "I do not know anyone here, and my uncle clearly cannot reach me in this weather." The station master scratched his gray beard, his eyes darting toward the door as another gust rattled the building. "There is a hotel about 2 blocks north, but honestly, miss, I do not think you would make it. This is not like your eastern snow. This is a killer storm, and it has been years since we have seen one like this in December." Clara felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had not come all this way to fall apart now. She straightened her shoulders and picked up her carpet bag, preparing to face whatever fate awaited her, when the station door burst open with such force that both she and the station master jumped. A man stumbled in, covered head to toe in snow, his hat pulled low, and a bandana wrapped around his face. He kicked the door shut behind him with his boot and stood there for a moment, catching his breath, before pulling down the bandana to reveal a face that was both rugged and startlingly handsome. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark eyes that swept the room and landed on Clara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Charlie, you still here?" the man said to the station master, his voice deep and rough from the cold. "I was hoping I would catch you before you left." "Dalton Crawford, what in blazes are you doing out in this?" Charlie demanded. "You should be home with your stock battened down." "My stock is fine, and my ranch hands have everything secured," Dalton said, brushing snow from his sheepskin coat. "I came into town for supplies before the storm hit, but it moved faster than anyone predicted. I was about to hole up at the hotel when I remembered the train was due in this afternoon. I thought there might be passengers stranded." His eyes moved to Clara again, and she felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she could not quite name. There was something about the way he looked at her, not with the dismissive glance most men gave women in her experience, but with genuine concern and an assessing intelligence that suggested he was already working through solutions to her problem. "This young lady is stuck," Charlie said, gesturing toward Clara. "Her uncle was supposed to meet her, but obviously that is not happening. I was just telling her I have got to get home to my wife, and the hotel might as well be in the next territory for all the good it will do her." Dalton pulled off his gloves and stepped closer, and Clara noticed his hands were strong and capable, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "Madam," he said, his voice gentler now, "my ranch is about 3 miles outside town. It is not close, but I know the way even in this weather, and I have got a good horse who can get us there. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, lives on the property with her husband. You would be safe and warm until the storm passes and we can get you to your uncle. I am offering shelter, nothing more, but I understand if you would rather take your chances here or at the hotel." Clara studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ill intent, but all she saw was honest concern and a straightforward offer of help. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, especially men, but something in her gut told her this cowboy was trustworthy. Perhaps it was the way he had braved the storm specifically to check for stranded passengers, or perhaps it was the open quality of his gaze, but she found herself nodding before she had fully thought through her decision. "I would be grateful for shelter," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My name is Clara Hayes, and I have come from Boston to teach at the school here." "Dalton Crawford," he said, extending his hand. When she placed hers in it, even through their gloves she felt the warmth and strength of his grip. "We need to move fast. This storm is only going to get worse, and I want to be well on our way before visibility drops to nothing." Charlie looked relieved to have the problem solved. "Miss Hayes, you are in good hands. The Crawford family has been in these parts for 20 years, and Dalton here is known as a fair and decent man. I will make sure word gets to your uncle that you are safe at the Double C Ranch." Within minutes, Clara found herself bundled in an extra coat Dalton produced from somewhere, her trunk secured behind them, and her body pressed against his back as they rode his massive bay horse into the teeth of the blizzard. The wind was so strong it threatened to rip her from the saddle, and the cold was unlike anything she had experienced in Boston. This was a primal, dangerous cold that seemed to reach into her bones and squeeze. Dalton guided the horse with confident hands, his body serving as a windbreak for Clara. She wrapped her arms around his waist and held on, feeling the solid muscle beneath his coat and the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He did not speak during the journey. All his attention focused on navigating through the whiteout, and Clara was grateful for his competence. She had placed her life in this stranger's hands, and he was proving worthy of that trust with every careful step of his horse. Time lost all meaning in the storm. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours before Dalton finally shouted, "There!" And Clara lifted her head to see the dim outline of buildings emerging from the snow. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a substantial 2-story house, a barn, and several outbuildings. Dalton guided the horse directly to the barn, and the moment they were inside and out of the wind, the silence was so profound that Clara's ears rang. "Can you stand?" Dalton asked, his voice hoarse as he dismounted and reached up to help her down. Clara's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She had been clenched so tightly against the cold that her muscles had frozen in position, and now they screamed in protest. Dalton caught her easily, his hands on her waist, and for a moment they stood face to face in the dim barn, their breaths forming clouds in the frigid air. "You did well," he said softly. "Many people would have panicked out there, but you held steady. That takes courage." "I was terrified," Clara admitted, her teeth beginning to chatter now that the immediate danger had passed. "Courage is not the absence of fear," Dalton said, a slight smile touching his lips. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Now let us get you inside before you freeze solid." He quickly unsaddled his horse, rubbed the animal down with practiced efficiency, and threw a heavy blanket over its back before leading Clara through the snow to the main house. The door opened before they reached it, and a round, kind-faced woman stood silhouetted against the warm light from inside. "Mr. Dalton, thank the Lord you are back," the woman said, ushering them inside. "I have been worried sick. And who is this?" "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Miss Clara Hayes. She was stranded at the train station, and I brought her here for shelter until the storm passes." Miss Hayes, this is my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who runs this household with an iron fist and makes the best tamales in New Mexico. Mrs. Rodriguez beamed at the compliment even as she bustled Clara toward the fireplace in the spacious main room. You poor thing, you are frozen through. Come, sit by the fire. I will get you something hot to drink and some dry clothes. Mr. Dalton, you get yourself warmed up too. You are going to catch your death going out in that storm. It was necessary, Dalton said simply, shrugging out of his snow-covered coat, as Clara thawed by the fire, clutching a cup of hot chocolate that Mrs. Rodriguez pressed into her hands. She had the opportunity to really look at her rescuer for the first time. Dalton Crawford was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from years of physical labor rather than leisure. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his face had the weathered quality of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, dark and intelligent, with a depth that suggested he thought more than he spoke. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. Warmer now. Yes, thank you, Clara said, feeling heat rush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I am sorry to impose on your hospitality like this. If you had not come to the station, I do not know what would have happened to me. You would have figured something out, Dalton said, settling into a chair across from her with his own cup of coffee. You strike me as resourceful. You do not know anything about me, Clara pointed out. I know you traveled alone from Boston to teach school in a frontier town. That tells me you are brave, independent, and probably have a good deal of determination. I know you made a quick decision to trust a stranger in a dangerous situation, which means you have good instincts. And I know you did not fall apart during a ride that would have panicked most city women. So yes, I think I know a few things about you, Miss Hayes. Clara found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. You are very observant, Mr. Crawford. Dalton, please. An observation is important in ranching. You have to be able to read animals, weather, and people if you want to survive out here. Mrs. Rodriguez bustled in with an armful of clothes. These belonged to Mr. Dalton's mother. She passed 5 years ago, God rest her soul, but she was about your size, Miss Hayes. You can wear these while your things dry. The guest room is ready, and there is a fire going to take the chill off. You should rest after your ordeal. Thank you. You are very kind, Clara said, taking the clothes. They smelled faintly of lavender and had been carefully preserved. My mother would have been happy to know they were being put to use, Dalton said, a shadow passing over his face. She always said a house should be filled with people and laughter, not just kept as a museum to the past. Clara followed Mrs. Rodriguez upstairs to a charming bedroom decorated with simple but well-made furniture and curtains that matched the quilt on the bed. After she changed into the borrowed nightgown and robe, she stood at the window and watched the snow fall in thick curtains, obscuring everything beyond the glass. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, and she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the cowboy who had saved her life. When she returned downstairs, drawn by the smell of cooking food despite her intention to go straight to bed, she found Dalton still sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with a thoughtful expression. He looked up when she entered and something in his face softened. Could not sleep. He asked. I am too keyed up from everything that happened, Clara admitted, settling back into her chair. And something smells wonderful. Mrs. Rodriguez is making her famous beef stew. She insists that anyone who has been out in a storm needs a proper meal. Her husband, Miguel, is out in the bunkhouse with the ranch hands, making sure they are all settled for the duration. How long do you think the storm will last? Clara asked. Hard to say. Could be a day, could be 3. These mountain blizzards are unpredictable. He paused, studying her face in the firelight. "You do not need to worry. You are safe here and we have plenty of supplies. When the weather clears, I will take you into town myself and make sure you get settled." "Why did you really come to the station?" Clara asked suddenly. "You could have stayed safe here at your ranch, but instead you risked your life in that storm." "Why?" Dalton was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "My father died in a blizzard when I was 15. He went out to check on a neighbor and never made it home. They found him 3 days later, frozen about 100 yards from the neighbor's barn. He had gotten turned around in the whiteout and did not even know he was close to shelter." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Ever since then, I cannot stand the thought of someone being caught out in a storm without help. It is probably foolish, but I have to try." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "It is not foolish. It is one of the bravest things I have ever heard, and I am alive because of your compassion." "I am glad I went then," Dalton said softly. "The world would be a poorer place without you in it, Clara Hayes." The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her, and she realized with some surprise that she liked the way it sounded in his deep voice. "You do not even know me," she said, echoing her earlier words. "Then I guess we will have to remedy that while the storm keeps us here," Dalton said, a genuine smile transforming his serious face into something that made her heart skip a beat. They talked through dinner, which they ate at a sturdy oak table while Mrs. Rodriguez fussed over them like a mother hen. Clara learned that Dalton had inherited the ranch from his father and had built it into one of the most successful operations in the territory through hard work and smart business decisions. He raised cattle and horses, and he was particularly proud of his breeding program for strong, intelligent animals suited to the harsh New Mexico climate. In turn, Clara told him about her life in Boston, the daughter of a schoolteacher mother and a bookkeeper father, both deceased now. She had always wanted to teach, inspired by her mother's dedication to education, and when the opportunity came to head west and start fresh, she had seized it despite her friends' warnings about the dangers of frontier life. "They thought I was crazy," Clara said, laughing a little. "They said I would be scalped by Indians or eaten by bears, or married off to some toothless prospector within a week. Well, you have not been scalped or eaten yet, and I do have all my teeth," Dalton said with a grin that showed off said teeth to great effect. "Though I am a rancher, not a prospector." "I noticed the teeth," Clara said before she could stop herself, then felt her face flame red. "I mean, that is, I was not particularly looking at your teeth. I just meant that obviously you are not toothless, not that I have been studying your mouth." Dalton's grin widened. "Noted. For the record, I noticed that you have excellent teeth as well." Mrs. Rodriguez, clearing plates from the table, made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a laugh disguised as a cough. That night, lying in the comfortable guest bed while the wind howled outside, Clara found herself thinking about Dalton Crawford in ways that were probably improper for someone she had just met. There was something about him that drew her, a combination of strength and gentleness that she had never encountered before. The men she had known in Boston had been either overly refined and pompous or rough laborers with little education. Dalton was different, a man who could brave a killer storm but also speak with intelligence and kindness, who could run a successful ranch but still check a train station for stranded passengers. She told herself it was just gratitude she was feeling, a natural response to being rescued, but as she drifted off to sleep, it was his dark eyes and slow smile that filled her dreams. The storm raged for 2 full days, and during that time, Clara discovered that being snowbound with Dalton Crawford was perhaps the most pleasant confinement she could imagine. They spent hours talking by the fire, discussing everything from books to politics to their hopes for the future. Dalton had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh more than she had in years. He showed her around the parts of the ranch they could reach, introducing her to his horses in the barn, magnificent animals that nuzzled his pockets looking for the treats he always carried. His favorite was a black mare named Midnight, who had the kind of intelligence in her eyes that suggested she understood every word spoken to her. "I raised her from a foal," Dalton explained, stroking the mare's neck with obvious affection. "Her mother died giving birth, and I hand-fed her for months. She thinks I am her parent, I suppose. She follows me around like a dog when I let her out in the pasture." "She is beautiful," Clara said, cautiously reaching out to touch the mare's soft nose. Midnight wafted warm breath on her hand and seemed to approve of her. "She likes you," Dalton observed. "She is particular about people. Would not let my last ranch foreman within 5 feet of her, which should have told me something. Turned out he was stealing from me. I had to let him go." "So Midnight is a good judge of character?" Clara asked. "Better than most people I know," Dalton said seriously. "Animals do not lie or pretend. They react to who you really are, not who you claim to be." On the second evening, after a dinner of Mrs. Rodriguez's famous tamales, Dalton taught Clara to play poker, much to the housekeeper's amused disapproval. They used dried beans as betting chips and sat at the kitchen table while the fire crackled and the storm continued its assault outside. "You are far too good at bluffing for a schoolteacher," Dalton said after Clara won the 3rd hand in a row. "I had brothers growing up," Clara said, raking in her pile of beans. "Well, cousins who were like brothers. They taught me all their card games, though I was never allowed to play with them when their friends came over. I used to watch from the stairs and memorize the strategies." "Remind me never to play you for actual money," Dalton said, dealing another hand. "I would end up losing the ranch." "I would give it back," Clara assured him. "After all, where else would I go in this storm?" Their eyes met across the table, and the playful mood shifted into something more intense. Clara felt her breath catch as Dalton reached across and gently took her hand. "Clara," he said quietly, "I know we have only known each other a few days, but I need to tell you something. When I saw you in that station, scared but trying to be brave, something in me recognized you. I do not believe in love at first sight, never have, but I believe in knowing when someone matters. And you matter. I do not want to frighten you off or make you uncomfortable, especially since you are stuck here with nowhere to go. But when this storm ends and I take you back to town, I would like to court you properly if you would allow it." Clara's heart was thundering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Dalton, I feel the same way. I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude or the strange intimacy of being thrown together by circumstances, but it is more than that. When you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before. When you talk, I want to listen. When you smile, I feel warm all the way through. I would very much like for you to court me." The smile that spread across Dalton's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He stood and drew her to her feet, his hands warm and solid on hers. "I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right." "That is very much all right," Clara whispered. His lips were soft on hers, the kiss gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. Clara's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the strength there, and she let herself sink into the feeling of being held and wanted. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dalton rested his forehead against hers. "I think I am in serious trouble," he murmured. "What kind of trouble?" Clara asked. "The kind where I am halfway to being completely in love with you and I have known you for less than a week." "Then we are in the same kind of trouble," Clara said, "because I am right there with you." Mrs. Rodriguez, appearing from seemingly nowhere with her impeccable timing, cleared her throat. "The storm is ending," she announced, though her eyes were twinkling. "The wind has stopped, and the snow is lighter. By morning, the roads should be passable." Clara felt a pang of disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. She wanted more time here, in this warm house with this man who made her feel things she had never experienced before. But she also knew that the real world awaited, with her teaching position and her uncle and all the responsibilities she had come west to embrace. "Then we should make the most of tonight," Dalton said, still holding Clara's hand. "Mrs. Rodriguez, would you mind if we raided your kitchen for some of those cookies you baked yesterday?" "For you too, anything," the housekeeper said, her round face creased with a smile. "I will be in my quarters if you need me. Try not to stay up too late." They settled back by the fire with a plate of cookies and fresh coffee, and Clara curled up in her chair, studying Dalton's profile in the firelight. "What made you want to be a rancher?" she asked. "It is in my blood, I suppose," Dalton said. "My grandfather came out here with nothing and carved this ranch out of raw territory. My father expanded it, made it profitable. When he died, I was determined to honor his legacy by making it even better. But more than that, I love this land. I love the work, the animals, the challenge of it. Every day is different, and you succeed or fail based on your own efforts and choices. There is something pure about that." "It sounds lonely, though," Clara observed. "It can be," Dalton admitted. "I have good men working for me, and Mrs. Rodriguez and Miguel are like family. But yes, sometimes the house feels too big and too quiet. I always thought I would marry someday, have children to fill these rooms, but the right woman never came along. The women in town are either already spoken for, or they want a man who will give them an easy life in the city, not the hard work of ranch life." "I do not need an easy life," Clara said softly. "I never have. I need a life that matters, where I can make a difference and be true to myself." "Teaching will give you that," Dalton said. "Silver City needs good teachers. The school is small, only about 30 students, but they are eager to learn. Your uncle, Thomas Hayes, is one of the town founders. He is a good man. He will help you get settled." "Tell me about the town," Clara said. "I only saw it briefly before the storm hit." Dalton described Silver City with obvious affection, painting a picture of a growing community with a mix of ranchers, miners, merchants, and families trying to build something permanent in the harsh but beautiful territory. There was a church, a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and the school where Clara would teach. The town was rough around the edges but had a strong sense of community. "People look out for each other here," Dalton said. "They have to. This land does not forgive mistakes or weakness, so we all help however we can. When someone's barn burns down, everyone shows up to rebuild it. When someone gets sick, the women bring food. It is not like the cities back east where you can be anonymous. Here, everyone knows everyone, for better or worse." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said. "I have always felt lost in crowds. I like the idea of knowing my neighbors and being part of a real community." They talked until the fire burned low, and Mrs. Rodriguez's cookies were reduced to crumbs. Finally, reluctantly, Dalton stood and helped Clara to her feet. "You should get some sleep," he said, though he did not let go of her hands. "Tomorrow will be a long day. I will take you to your uncle's house and you can start your new life properly." "I do not want this to end," Clara confessed. "These past 2 days have been strange and wonderful, and I feel like I am about to wake up from a dream." "It is not a dream," Dalton promised. "And it is not ending. Tomorrow is just the next chapter. I meant what I said about courting you, Clara. I will come calling with your uncle's permission, and we will spend time together the proper way. And if you find that you still like me when I am not the only option in a snowstorm, then we will see where this leads." "I will still like you," Clara said with certainty. "I know it here." She placed her hand over her heart. Dalton kissed her again, a sweet, lingering kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities. "Sleep well, Clara Hayes." "Good night, Dalton Crawford." The next morning dawned clear and cold. The world transformed into a sparkling white wonderland that was both beautiful and treacherous. Dalton loaded Clara's trunk onto a sledge pulled by Midnight, who seemed perfectly content with the arrangement, and they set off toward Silver City with the sun glinting off the snow like scattered diamonds. The town was digging itself out when they arrived, with shopkeepers shoveling walkways and children having snowball fights in the street. Dalton guided Midnight to a neat clapboard house on the edge of town, and before they could dismount, the door burst open and a tall, gray-haired man rushed out. "Clara, thank God you are safe," Thomas Hayes exclaimed, his weathered face creased with worry. "When the storm hit, I tried to get to the station, but it was impossible. I have been frantic." "Uncle Thomas," Clara said, sliding down from the sledge and into her uncle's embrace. "I am fine. This is Dalton Crawford. He rescued me from the station and gave me shelter at his ranch during the storm." Thomas Hayes turned to Dalton with eyes that were remarkably like Clara's, gray-blue and intelligent. He extended his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay." If anything had happened to her, I would never have forgiven myself for not being there. "No debt necessary," Dalton said, shaking the older man's hand firmly. "I did what anyone would do. Miss Hayes is a remarkable woman. She handled everything with courage and grace." Thomas studied Dalton's face for a long moment, then glanced at Clara, and something in his expression shifted. "I see. Well, would you come in for coffee, Mr. Crawford? It is the least I can offer." Inside the warm, book-lined house, Thomas Hayes proved to be a gracious host and a shrewd observer. As they drank coffee and Clara told a carefully edited version of her time at the ranch, Thomas watched the way Dalton and Clara looked at each other, the small gestures of familiarity, the unspoken communication. Finally, he set down his cup and leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Crawford, I am not a fool. I can see that something has developed between you and my niece in the short time she has been under your roof. Now, Clara is a grown woman and can make her own choices, but I am her only family, and I feel responsible for her welfare. What are your intentions?" "Uncle Thomas," Clara protested, her face flushing red, but Dalton met the older man's gaze steadily. "My intentions are entirely honorable, sir. I would like your permission to court Clara properly. I know we have only just met, but I believe she is someone special, and I would like the chance to prove myself worthy of her." "He saved my life," Clara said quietly, "and he has been nothing but respectful and kind. I want this too, Uncle Thomas." Thomas sighed and rubbed his face. "You just got here, Clara. Do you not want to settle in, start teaching, get to know the town before you commit to a courtship?" "I can do all those things while also getting to know Dalton better," Clara pointed out. "I am not agreeing to marry him tomorrow. I am simply agreeing to let him call on me. Is that so terrible?" "When you put it that way, I sound like an ogre for objecting," Thomas said, but his eyes were kind. "All right, Mr. Crawford. You have my permission to court my niece, but I will be watching. If you hurt her, you will answer to me." "I would expect nothing less," Dalton said seriously. "Thank you, sir." After Dalton left, promising to return for Sunday dinner, Thomas showed Clara through the house that would be her home. It was cozy and comfortable, with a room that would be hers and a small study where she could prepare her lessons. As Clara unpacked her trunk, Thomas leaned against the doorframe and watched her. "He seems like a good man," he said finally. The Crawfords have a solid reputation, and I have heard nothing but good things about Dalton specifically. But Clara, are you sure about this? You could have your pick of men once you are settled. There is no need to rush into anything." "I am not rushing," Clara said, carefully hanging her dresses in the wardrobe. "But I am also not going to pretend I do not feel what I feel. When I am with Dalton, I feel like myself, only better. He listens when I talk. He respects my opinions. He makes me laugh. And yes, we have only known each other a few days, but sometimes you just know when something is right." Thomas smiled. "You sound like your mother. She said the same thing about your father when they met. 3 weeks later they were engaged. Your grandmother nearly had apoplexy." "I promise not to get engaged in 3 weeks," Clara said, laughing. "But I am not going to close myself off to the possibility either." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences. Clara started teaching at the Silver City School, and she fell in love with her students immediately. They ranged from 6 to 14, children of ranchers and miners and shopkeepers, all eager for education, even if some of them struggled with sitting still in a classroom after a life of outdoor freedom. She challenged them with literature and mathematics, encouraged their questions, and found ways to make lessons practical and relevant to their lives. True to his word, Dalton came calling every Sunday for dinner, and on Wednesday evenings he would ride into town and take Clara for walks or sit with her in Thomas's parlor, always proper with the door open and Thomas reading in his chair nearby. They talked endlessly, discovering shared tastes in books and music, debating politics and philosophy, laughing over silly jokes and shared stories of their childhoods. Clara met Mrs. Rodriguez and Miguel in town one Saturday at the general store, and the housekeeper pulled her into a warm hug. "You are good for him," she whispered. "I have not seen Mr. Dalton this happy in years. You make him smile, really smile, and that is a precious gift." "He makes me happy too," Clara confessed. "I did not expect to find this when I came west. The best things are always unexpected, Mrs. Rodriguez said wisely. As winter gave way to early spring, Dalton invited Clara and Thomas out to the ranch for the day. Thomas had business to attend to in town, but he gave Clara permission to go with Dalton's promise to have her home before dark. The ranch was different in daylight without the threat of a blizzard, and Clara could see the full scope of Dalton's operation. He showed her the cattle in the far pastures, the horses in their corrals, the garden that Mrs. Rodriguez tended with fierce pride. He introduced her to his ranch hands, who tipped their hats and greeted her with shy respect, clearly having heard about the boss's sweetheart. "They know who you are," Dalton said as they walked toward a small hill behind the house. "I may have mentioned you once or twice. Only once or twice." Clara teased. "All right, maybe more than that," Dalton admitted. "I cannot help it. You are always on my mind." At the top of the hill, they could see for miles in every direction, the land rolling away in shades of brown and green under a brilliant blue sky. Dalton stood behind Clara, his arms around her waist, and pointed out landmarks. "That is where my grandfather first built his cabin, that cluster of trees there. The original structure is gone, but the foundation is still there. And over that way is Copper Canyon, where some of the best grazing land in the territory can be found. On a clear day, you can see mountains in 3 directions. It is beautiful," Clara breathed. "I understand why you love it." "I want to share it with you," Dalton said quietly. "Not just for a day, but always. Clara, I know it has only been a few months, but I am absolutely certain about my feelings. I love you. I want to marry you, build a life with you, fill that big house with children and laughter. I want to grow old with you and watch sunsets from this hill when we are gray and creaky. I want everything with you." Clara turned in his arms, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first night when you told me why you went out in the storm. You have the best heart of anyone I have ever known, and yes, Dalton Crawford, I want all those things with you too. He kissed her there on the hill with the whole territory spread out below them, and it felt like a promise being sealed, a future being written. When they finally pulled apart, Dalton reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "This was my mother's ring," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold band with a small diamond. "It is not much, but it has been in my family for 2 generations. If you will have it, if you will have me, I would be honored to make you my wife." "Yes," Clara said through happy tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her finger. They stood there for a long time, holding each other and watching the clouds drift across the sky, both marveling at how a blizzard and a chance rescue had led to this moment. Thomas Hayes gave his blessing with tears in his eyes and a bear hug that nearly cracked Dalton's ribs. "Take care of her," he said gruffly. "She is the only family I have." "She will be treasured every day of her life," Dalton promised. "You have my word." They were married in May, when the wildflowers covered the hills in carpets of color, and the weather was perfect for an outdoor celebration. The whole town turned out, curious about the Eastern school teacher who had won the heart of one of Silver City's most eligible bachelors. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of local flowers that Mrs. Rodriguez had gathered that morning. As she walked down the aisle of the small church on her uncle's arm, Clara saw Dalton waiting for her at the altar, and the love in his eyes made everything else fade away. This man, this cowboy who had ridden into a blizzard to rescue stranded passengers, who ran his ranch with fairness and worked alongside his men, who read poetry by the fire and could make her laugh until her sides ached, was about to become her husband. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them man and wife, Dalton kissed her with a tenderness that made half the women in attendance reach for their handkerchiefs. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables laden with food, music from a fiddle player, and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. "Happy, Mrs. Crawford," Dalton murmured as they swayed together under the lantern light. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Clara said, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for saving me from that blizzard." "Thank you for trusting me enough to accept my help," Dalton countered. "And for agreeing to spend your life with a cowboy who smells like horses and gets up before dawn." "I happen to like horses," Clara said, "and I am becoming quite fond of early mornings. Besides, you are my cowboy, and I would not trade you for anything." Clara continued teaching through the first year of their marriage, and she loved balancing her 2 worlds. During the week, she lived in town with Thomas, teaching her students and grading papers in the evenings. On weekends, Dalton would come fetch her, and she would spend Saturday and Sunday at the ranch, learning the rhythms of that life and falling more in love with both the land and her husband. But as summer turned to fall, Clara began to feel unwell in the mornings, and Mrs. Rodriguez noticed immediately, her knowing eyes lighting up with joy. "You are with child," the housekeeper said with certainty. "I can always tell. You have that glow." Clara had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it real. She told Dalton that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then set her down carefully as if she were made of spun glass. "Are you happy?" Clara asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Dalton said, his hands framing her face. "You have given me everything I ever wanted. a home filled with love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man in New Mexico, possibly the world. Clara gave up teaching in December as her pregnancy advanced and moved to the ranch full-time. Thomas visited often, already excited about being a great uncle, and Clara settled into ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to cook from Mrs. Rodriguez, to tend the garden, to keep the household accounts, and to sit a horse well enough to accompany Dalton on short rides around the property. Their son was born in March of 1879, during a spring rainstorm that seemed to bless the whole territory with its gentle soaking rain. They named him Daniel Thomas Crawford, after both grandfathers, and from the moment Clara held him, she understood a depth of love she had never known existed. Dalton was an attentive, devoted father. He would walk the floor with Daniel at night when the baby fussed, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until the infant settled. He carved a cradle from oak and a rocking horse for when the boy was older. He talked to his son constantly, narrating ranch life and making promises about all the things they would do together. "He cannot understand you yet," Clara pointed out, amused, as Dalton explained the finer points of breeding cattle to their 3-month-old son. "He is learning the sound of my voice," Dalton said seriously. "And besides, it is never too early to start his education." As Daniel grew from infant to toddler, Clara watched her husband teach their son with infinite patience. He showed him how to be gentle with animals, how to observe the weather, how to work hard, but also how to find joy in small things. Daniel's first word was "da," and Dalton's face when he heard it was something Clara would treasure forever. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny, fierce creature with her mother's gray eyes and her father's dark hair. They named her Margaret Rose after both grandmothers, but she was called Maggie from the start. Where Daniel was cautious and thoughtful, Maggie was bold and adventurous, climbing everything she could reach and demanding to be included in all her older brother's activities. "She is going to be trouble," Dalton said fondly, watching 2-year-old Maggie attempt to scale a fence post. "She gets that from you," Clara said, rescuing their daughter before she could succeed and injure herself. "I have no idea what you mean," Dalton said with mock innocence. "I am a responsible, respectable rancher." "You are the man who rode into a blizzard alone to check for stranded passengers," Clara reminded him. "You have never met a risk you would not take if you thought it was the right thing to do." "Fair point," Dalton conceded. "Though I would argue that particular risk gave me the best reward I could imagine." Life on the ranch fell into comfortable rhythms. The children grew, the herd expanded, and the ranch prospered under Dalton's careful management. Clara had never been happier, waking each morning to the sound of her husband moving around their bedroom as he dressed for the day's work, the smell of Mrs. Rodriguez's coffee drifting up from the kitchen, and the patter of small feet as Daniel and Maggie woke and began their morning routine. She had kept in touch with her friends back in Boston, and their letters expressed amazement at her transformation from city school teacher to ranch wife and mother. Clara would write back, trying to explain how fulfilling this life was, how much she loved the land and the work and the community they had built. But she suspected they could not truly understand unless they experienced it themselves. When Daniel was 6 and Maggie was 4, a third baby arrived, another boy they named James, who had his father's even temperament and a fascination with everything that crawled, hopped, or flew. Dalton built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and the rooms that had once been too quiet now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Thomas remained a constant presence, visiting at least once a week and spoiling his great nieces and nephews shamelessly. He had aged gracefully, his hair now completely white but his mind still sharp. He loved nothing more than sitting on the porch with a child on each knee, telling stories about Clara's mother and the old days in Boston. "You chose well," Thomas told Clara one evening after the children were in bed. They were sitting on the porch, watching Dalton work with a young horse in the corral. "He is a good man, and he loves you and those children with everything in him. Your mother would have approved." "I think so too," Clara said softly. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that storm had not hit, if I had met Uncle Thomas at the station as planned. Would Dalton and I have ever met?" "I believe you would have," Thomas said firmly. "Maybe not the same way, but somehow. Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what." As the years passed, Clara watched her children grow into remarkable individuals. Daniel inherited his father's love of ranching, and by age 12 could work alongside the ranch hands with confidence. Maggie developed a passion for horses that exceeded even Dalton's, and she could ride like she had been born in the saddle. James proved to have his mother's love of learning, and would spend hours reading any book he could get his hands on. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Clara back to the hill where he had proposed. They had left the children with Mrs. Rodriguez and Miguel, who insisted they needed time alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, and the land spread before them like a promise kept. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked, his arm around Clara's waist. "Giving up teaching, the town life, the security of living with your uncle? This was not what you planned when you came west." "Not for a single moment," Clara said honestly. "Yes, I loved teaching, but I love our life more. I love waking up next to you every morning. I love watching our children grow. I love this land and this community and the life we have built together. If I had to do it all over again, I would not change a thing. Even the blizzard," Dalton teased. "Especially the blizzard," Clara said, turning to face him. "That storm brought me to you, and you are the greatest gift I have ever received. You are my home, Dalton Crawford. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Clara thought about the frightened young woman she had been that day in the train station, not knowing that the cowboy who walked through the door would become her entire world. She had come west looking for a new beginning, and she had found so much more than that. She had found love, family, purpose, and a place where she truly belonged. Years continued to flow like water, bringing changes both subtle and profound. The children grew taller and more independent. Daniel, at 16, was already talking about expanding the ranch's breeding program with his father. Maggie, at 14, had become an accomplished horsewoman who competed in regional riding competitions. James, at 12, had announced his intention to become a lawyer and help establish fair laws in the territory. The territory of New Mexico was changing too, growing and developing as more people came west. Silver City had expanded, adding new businesses and amenities. There was talk of statehood, of railroads expanding their routes, of the wild frontier becoming something more civilized and settled. Thomas Hayes passed away peacefully in his sleep when Clara was 38, and she mourned the loss of her beloved uncle deeply. Dalton held her through her grief, and her children comforted her with their presence. They buried Thomas on the ranch, on a peaceful spot overlooking the valley, where wildflowers bloomed every spring. "He loved it here," Clara said at the simple graveside service. "He told me once that, when he saw how happy I was, how much I loved this land and this life, he understood why my mother had always felt constrained in Boston. Some souls need wide, open spaces to truly flourish." As Clara entered her 40s and then her 50s, she watched her children marry and start families of their own. Daniel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they built a house on Crawford land, expanding the family operation. Maggie surprised everyone by falling in love with a veterinarian who had come west from Philadelphia, a quiet, scholarly man who adored her fierce spirit. James went east to study law but returned to New Mexico to practice, bringing with him a wife who was a teacher, much to Clara's delight. The grandchildren came in a joyful procession. Daniel and his wife Sarah had 4 children in quick succession. Maggie and her husband David had twins, a boy and a girl. James and his wife Elizabeth had 3 children spread over several years. The ranch house that had once been too quiet now overflowed with family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and the blessed chaos of multiple generations under one roof. Dalton's hair turned silver, then white, but his dark eyes remained as sharp and loving as ever when he looked at Clara. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching grandchildren play in the yard while the sun set over land that 4 generations of Crawfords had worked and loved. "You remember that day in the train station?" Clara asked one evening, reaching for Dalton's weathered hand. "Every detail," Dalton said. "I remember walking through that door and seeing you standing by the window, trying so hard to be brave. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even half frozen and frightened." "I remember thinking you were my salvation," Clara said. "And I was right, but not in the way I thought. You did not just save my life that day. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Dalton corrected gently. "I was existing before you, just going through the motions. You brought color and joy and meaning to everything. You made this house a home. You gave me children and grandchildren and a reason to smile every single day." On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children organized a huge celebration at the ranch. It seemed like half of New Mexico showed up, spanning 3 generations of families who had grown and prospered alongside the Crawfords. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, and a cake that misses. Rodriguez's daughter and granddaughter had baked, carrying on the tradition of hospitality that had always marked the Crawford home. As Clara and Dalton danced together under strings of lanterns, moving slowly to a waltz played by a small band, Clara looked up at her husband and saw the young cowboy who had saved her life still there in his eyes. The years had changed them both, had weathered and shaped them, but the love remained constant and true. "Thank you," Clara whispered. "For what?" Dalton asked. "For riding into that storm. For offering shelter to a frightened stranger. For loving me every single day for 50 years. For giving me the most beautiful life I could have imagined." "The pleasure has been entirely mine," Dalton said, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Crawford. My greatest adventure started the day you accepted my offer of shelter." They continued to dance as their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren looked on, a living testament to what a chance meeting in a blizzard and an offer of kindness had created. Clara closed her eyes and let herself be held by the man she loved, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every joy they had shared. The story of how Clara Hayes had been stuck at the station in a blizzard, and a cowboy had offered shelter became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished by grandchildren and preserved in letters and journals. But for Clara and Dalton, it was simply the beginning of their great love story, the moment when 2 souls found each other in the midst of a storm and chose to build a life together in the wide open spaces of the New Mexico territory. They lived long, full lives, surrounded by family and love until the very end. When they were both in their 80s, they would still take slow walks around the ranch, hand in hand, remembering all the moments that had brought them to this place of deep contentment. And when they spoke of that first meeting, that desperate night when the blizzard raged and fate brought them together, they both agreed it was the most fortunate storm either of them had ever experienced. Their love had started with shelter from a blizzard, but it had grown into something vast and enduring, a legacy that would continue through all the generations that followed. And that, Clara often thought, was the greatest gift of all, to know that the love she and Dalton had found on that cold winter night would echo forward through time, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and two hearts recognizing each other across the chaos of a storm.